Despite being an award-winning series beloved by millions, Dexter has a lot of plot holes and inconsistencies that left many people baffled. Let's take a look at some of the most obvious problems with the show, starting with Maria's selective memory and detective skills. In the 8th episode of Dexter Original Sin, Detective LaGuerta uncovered a pivotal piece of evidence in Harry's car. While investigating the death of a psychiatrist related to their NHI or No Humans Involved case, Harry found a sealed file labeled Moser B. Inside were the psychiatric records detailing the violent history and institutionalization of Brian Moser, Dexter's biological brother, and the son of Harry's former CI, Laura Moser. Harry had no idea what happened to Brian after his mother was murdered by a dangerous cartel because, unlike Dexter, Harry had opted not to adopt Brian after the tragedy. The file also contained a photo of Brian and notes suggesting that he knew about Harry's affair with his mother and had an undying desire to reunite with Dexter. Harry realized the threat Brian could pose to Dexter's happiness and safety if the file was included in the department's NHI case investigation. So he stole the file to prevent Maria from learning the truth about Dexter's past and conceal his former affairs with criminal informants. But Maria was naturally suspicious of Harry's cagey attitude and strange actions. So later, while Harry was out of sight ordering their dinner, Maria snagged the file and read all about Brian. But she didn't understand why Harry would have hidden it from her. Before she could confront Harry about the file, they received urgent news of a shooting involving Harry's usual partner, Bobby Watt, which diverted any attention from the file for a while.
Is he okay?
But when they got to the hospital, Maria took Harry aside to inquire about what she saw. He lied to her about why he took the file and assured her it was unrelated to the NHI case, and she bought it. It seemed reasonable enough, but what is unreasonable is that Maria, who is sharp as a tack, didn't make any inferences of connections after Brian became active again years later as the ice truck killer. Brian had taken to killing prostitutes and leaving their bodies around Miami in order to draw Dexter back to him about a decade after Harry's death. And while he was going under an assumed name and was a skilled and discreet killer, Brian was later discovered for who he really was. Maria was the lieutenant of homicide at the time, but she never made the connection between the NHI case and the ice truck killer. What's more is that Deb was Brian's last attempted victim, and Dexter was on the scene when the police tried to apprehend him. Even with all of those suspicious coincidences, Maria never recognized Brian as the man from the file she had read all those years ago. Some may say that enough time had passed that she'd forgotten about all of it, but the NHI killer case was never solved, and Maria is a very dedicated and capable detective. She should have eventually come to realize everything about Brian and his connection to Dexter, but it is never revisited at all. It's such a major plot hole that fans still discuss it to this day. But Dexter's storyline is filled with so many other plot holes that perhaps this one can be forgiven. One of the most overlooked plot holes in Dexter is probably the fact that he pulled off a murder inside of an airport. As season 7 kicks off, Dexter is shown driving like a madman, presumably to get away after Deb caught him in the act of killing the Doomsday Killer, Travis Marshall.
Exactly.
It's already a big enough plot hole that he wouldn't have barricaded the entrance to the church or heard someone open the giant heavy wooden door, but the show has an even bigger plot hole right after that. Dexter and Deb worked together to hide the evidence of his crime after she walks in. Even though she helped him cover up his crime, it would make sense that he would need to go on the run after being discovered by the lieutenant of homicide, even if it was his own sister. But the keen eye can catch that Harrison is not with him in the car. Surely he wouldn't abandon his own son with no explanation. So where was he really going? As it turns out, he was headed to an airport. Not to catch a flight, but to catch a killer. Victor Baskov, a member of the Koshka Brotherhood, killed a member of Miami Metro's homicide department. After killing Mike Anderson, Victor went on the run. But he could not outrun Dexter. Dexter broke into Victor's house and was able to determine that the killer was on his way to the airport to catch a flight out of the country in order to evade any consequences for his crimes. Dexter was able to catch him in the middle of his escape, but the rest really didn't make any sense. Dexter caught the killer in the bathroom and injected him with sedative as usual to subdue him. After that, Dexter placed him in a wheelchair and rolled him out of the bathroom and strolled through the airport. It might make sense that no one asked any questions about a man being asleep in a wheelchair being chartered by another person to their gate. But what does not make any sense is Dexter being able to wheel the unconscious man into an unused area for unclaimed baggage without being detected. Airports are some of the most heavily surveilled places in any country. So just effortlessly injecting a patron with a sedative and then bringing him into an area that is less frequented without anyone detecting, stopping, or even questioning him is preposterous. Dexter passes several cameras with Victor, yet somehow he is able to enter the shadowy room undetected, construct a kill room, and kill a man who is begging for his life without anyone being the wiser. Beyond even that, he manages to get out of the airport with the corpse, and still no one notices a thing. Some people make the joke about airline workers being lazy and disinterested, but how disinterested must one be to ignore an entire murder happening on the premises? The fact of the matter is that even with every single one of Harry's rules in place, there is no conceivable way that Dexter could have pulled off such a kill. He should have been stopped, he should have been detected, even if it happened later on, but no reckoning ever came. The writers of the show made it seem as if he could kill with impunity, even in a place that is more monitored than any place he has ever attempted to kill before. An airport is not a safe place to try to pull what Dexter pulled, and only an idiot would try to perform his ritual in such a space, yet nothing ever came of it. He was able to kill a person that a major department of Miami's police force was looking for without so much as a second glance. The idea of getting past TSA with your laptop is already a ridiculous feat, but to go into a room you are not authorized to be in and remain there for as long as it takes to set up a kill room and then kill a man makes as little sense as anyone could imagine. It's like the writers were playing with us by including that in the show. It almost reads like fan fiction. The fact of the matter is that there is no way that Dexter would have been able to get in and out without raising suspicion from at least one person. Even more improbable is the idea that none of the people from the police force would have tracked Victor to the last place he was seen alive. Even though people affiliated with the Koshka Brotherhood were probably not very keen on speaking with authorities, what about the people who did not recognize the danger of speaking with police on the matter? Regular flyers who had no connection with the case. Many people must have witnessed Dexter wheeling the unconscious person of interest through the airport. The cameras must have caught him doing the same, and even with a full police investigation, nobody had any details. Again, it's simply ridiculous to assume that he would have been able to pull that off. One of the most glaring inconsistencies in Dexter was the decision to change his drug of choice from M99 to ketamine in the sequel series, Dexter New Blood. Initially, throughout almost all of Dexter's kills in the original series, he used M99 to incapacitate his victims before he killed them. This came after several messy starts as shown in Dexter Original Sin, where his victims were much harder to subdue, putting him at risk of being caught in the act. But for some reason, in Dexter New Blood, the Bay Harbor Butcher was presented as having used ketamine, an animal tranquilizer that was never even mentioned in the original series. When Dexter wanted to take out the drug dealer who almost killed his son Harrison, he went to a local woman in Iron Lake who took care of animals and asked for ketamine. He pretended like it was to help one of his animals, Vincent Van Gogh, but in reality, he was simply returning to his old ways of killing people after an almost decade-long hiatus. This could be explained easily enough, right? Perhaps he made the switch to ketamine because it was more easily accessible than M99 in Iron Lake. But the plot hole issues arise after Angela Bishop, the police chief in the town and Dexter's then girlfriend, started to investigate the Bay Harbor Butcher case of Miami. When she Googles information regarding the butcher, the search results all say that the killer used ketamine on his prey. It makes no sense at all and is obviously untrue. The writers retconned the drug for no known reason, and had they not done so, Angela's investigation into Dexter would not have been successful. Angela visits the same woman Dexter did to ask about who had recently bought ketamine from her. This was after the Google search, and when she heard that Jim Lindsay, Dexter's new false identity, had stopped in to acquire some, that all but confirmed her suspicions that he had been attacking people in Iron Lake and was most likely the true Bay Harbor Butcher. There were other clues that tipped her off, but she knew that the drug dealer Dexter had attacked was jabbed with a needle, and his supplier had ketamine in his system when he was found dead. The wheel marks on the butcher's victims aligned with this MO. On top of that, there were few other explanations for a man using a false name who had fled across the country from Miami to have so many odd coincidences surrounding him. People in Iron Lake had started disappearing and dying recently. Dexter lied about his real name, he lied about having a son, and all of a sudden he was purchasing large amounts of ketamine too? It made sense why Chief Bishop was suspicious, but it made absolutely no sense that the articles she read regarding the Bay Harbor Butcher mentioned him using ketamine. He literally didn't do that. This naturally annoyed most fans, and by the time the prequel series Dexter Original Sin was released, the writers had returned to the original storyline of him using M99 in his ritual. But the damage was done, and still, no one has an explanation for why the change was made in the first place. And although Original Sin attempted to right this wrong, there were still other plot holes and inconsistencies that the prequel itself was guilty of. In Original Sin, Dexter is shown working alongside his foster father, Harry Morgan, at Miami Metro. This clearly goes against the canon of the original series. In Dexter, it is shown that Harry dies while Dexter is still in college. Yet in Original Sin, Dexter is working at the police department right after graduating, and Harry is still a detective there as well. But there is no way that Harry should have still been there to work with him. Dexter is 20 years old when he graduates college, and it's not clear how old he was exactly when Harry died, but it's estimated that he was 21 or 22. When the original series begins, it's stated that Harry has been dead for 10 years, but it's also stated that Dexter is 35. That would mean that Dexter was actually 25 years old when Harry died, but again, that wouldn't align with the facts as they were presented initially. If Harry died while Dexter was in college, he wouldn't have been 25 years old. This lack of consistency may be easy enough to overlook for most fans, but it actually creates even more plot holes that are harder to ignore. For instance, in season 2 of the show, Sergeant Dokes had told Dexter that he knew he went to medical school before working for Miami Metro, but that would be impossible if he worked at the department at the same time as Harry. In fact, in Dexter Original Sin, it's shown that Dexter decides against attending medical school completely and went straight into an internship with the homicide department as soon as he graduated with his undergrad degree. Had he attended medical school and still decided to become a blood spatter analyst, he would have started his career at an age closer to 25 or 26. Harry would have been long dead, and the two would have never had any overlap in their tenure at Miami Metro. There are other issues with the timelines presented in both Original Sin and New Blood. For instance, Deborah's age is retconned to be closer to Dexter's in Original Sin. Similarly, in New Blood, Dexter's son Harrison is slated to be 16 years old, even though Dexter abandoned him when he should have been only 3 years old. Dexter was away from his son for only 10 years, and yet somehow Harrison is 16 when he arrives in Iron Lake. Additionally, in season 8 of Dexter, Harrison is supposed to be 5 years old, but given that he was born in 2009 and season 8 takes place 3 years later, that literally makes no sense. Again, these aren't major issues, and the show can still be enjoyed without hyper-focusing on them, but they are still pretty obvious and can be distracting at times. Luckily, there are larger plot holes to focus on if someone really wants to nitpick the series' shortcomings. A major one being the autoerotic mummification explanation in season 5. After Dexter killed Boyd Fowler, a man he suspected of being a serial killer, he was confronted by a woman named Lumen Pierce, who was meant to be Boyd's next victim. While at Boyd's property, Dexter discovered that Lumen was being held captive after she watched him kill her kidnapper. She had been taken and abused by Boyd and his friends, who became known as the Barrel Girls Gang. Even though she was afraid of Dexter at first, Lumen eventually realized he was not one of her attackers and sought his help in getting revenge against the actual perpetrators. Initially, Dexter was unwilling to compromise his life to help Lumen. He knew that it would only complicate matters for him and tried to send her back to her family. He takes Lumen to the airport and tries to ship her back to Minneapolis, but Lumen intentionally missed her plane, stayed in Miami, and went on with her plan to hunt down the men who hurt her. She lured one of the men to a warehouse one night under the false pretense of wanting to go on a date with him while in disguise. Known as Dan the Dentist, the man was indeed a part of the Barrel Girl gang, but Lumen couldn't pull off the murder on her own. She brought a gun with her and shot him when she had the chance, but he didn't die right away, and Lumen had to call Dexter for help. Dexter didn't even know that she was still in Miami, but since she had seen him kill Fowler, he knew the loose ends could come back to bite him. So he rushed to the scene to assist her, despite being in the middle of his own kill ritual. When he got to her, Dexter learned that Lumen's victim had managed to limp away and hide, but not without leaving a blood trail. And this is where one of the major plot holes comes in. Dan got away from Lumen, and she didn't know where he'd gone, but Dexter used luminol to detect his blood trail, and it led them right to him. But when Miami Metro is called to the scene to investigate the gunshots heard, Vince Masuka, a specialized and highly trained forensics investigator, doesn't seem to notice that the scene had already been sprayed with luminol. He follows the blood trail that Dexter illuminated, but doesn't even question the fact that someone had already used such a specialized substance on the scene of a potential murder that had allegedly just happened. The next plot hole in this scene is rooted in the fact that Lumen was not wearing any gloves and even changed clothes while she was on the scene, yet none of her DNA was discovered. Again, Vince Masuka is a brilliant forensics analyst. The Miami Metro team had to have gathered evidence from the crime scene like they would have for any other per protocol, and yet no one picks up Dexter or Lumen's DNA. Perhaps they could have overlooked Dexter's DNA being present. He was the one who found the victims after all. But how could they ignore the presence of an unknown woman when her DNA must have been all over that place? Not only that, but Masuka's explanation of autoerotic mummification being the cause of death for one of the men doesn't even come close to explaining the gunshot wound that Dan the dentist had, and it also fails to explain why his neck was snapped. Dexter finished Dan off by snapping his neck, but how does that fall into Masuka's explanation? It may have been a fun moment, but in the end, it simply makes no sense. Masuka has never misread a crime scene to that extent, and the fact that everyone just went along with it and there was no further investigation is even more confusing. And that isn't the only time that the show completely abandoned the basics of a forensics investigation. Again in Season 5, there is a laughably unrealistic moment that is almost impossible to explain. After Dexter learned that Lumen was kidnapped again by Jordan Chase, the leader of the Barrel Girls gang, he springs into action to save her. In his desperation to rescue Lumen from Jordan before it's too late, Dexter smashed the window of a random car with a rock and stole it to get to her. While speeding toward the camp where Lumen was being held, Dexter became distracted and lost control of the car. He flipped the vehicle in a violent crash and had to crawl from the car. The crash injured him a bit, but Dexter miraculously survived, only to realize that he had been found by Jordan immediately. Dexter was taken by Jordan at gunpoint and ended up restrained alongside Lumen at the camp. But while he was there, Dexter was able to get a knife from his kit, which he then used to free himself and stab Jordan in the foot. This allowed him to help Lumen get free after choking Jordan out while he was still reeling from the knife injury. Dexter and Lumen then teamed up one last time to kill Jordan, the only remaining member of the Barrel Girls gang, just as they had done to all the others. Eventually, Deborah arrived at the camp where Dexter and Lumen were still cleaning up the crime scene. She found Jordan's corpse, saw the aftermath of the kill, but allowed the pair to escape without ever realizing Dexter was one of the people responsible. Most of this makes enough sense, but what is inexplicable is the idea that Dexter could steal a car that is magically never investigated by police, crash it outside of a major crime scene, and leave no evidence that he had been the one driving. His DNA should have been all over that car, and yet somehow, even after Miami Metro investigates, they never discover that it was him. Additionally, the crime scene would have had Lumen's DNA all over it. It would have been a match for the DNA at Dan the dentist's crime scene if they had bothered to gather any in the first place. That would have told them a lot more about the probable perpetrator, and even if Deb didn't care to investigate further, other members of the department most likely would have. And still, somehow it all just goes away. No one seems to follow up about the car crash outside of the camp, the DNA at the scene of Jordan's disappearance, or even the idea that Deb followed a lead that led her right to the camp, but came back to the office empty-handed despite following up on it and finding a mysterious crime scene covered in the blood of Jordan Chase. Jordan was a very prominent man, and yet there seemed to be almost no investigation into his disappearance at all. It's implausible that a man of his social relevance could fall off of the face of the earth with no one from his family or the major company he ran being interested in getting to the bottom of it. Overall, the finale of Season 5 seemed very lazily written, and the season as a whole is one of the most heavily criticized by viewers as a result. Dexter drives his boat into a hurricane and survives. After Deb dies, Dexter is completely dejected. Much like after Rita's death, he wanted revenge, but even that would not restore to him what he had lost. Even after he killed Oliver Saxon, the man who killed his sister, nothing felt okay. Realizing yet again that his lifestyle would only hurt the people he loved, Dexter decided that he only had one option. He decided to run from Miami, leaving his young son Harrison behind along with his partner Hannah McKay. Dexter has always been good at detaching himself from those around him, so it is understandable how he would arrive at a decision like that. Plus, if he really did care for his son, it would stand to reason that he didn't want to endanger him by sticking around. The same goes for Hannah, as well as his stepchildren Astor and Cody. In order to pull off his disappearing act, Dexter takes his boat, the Slice of Life, and rides directly into a hurricane that was plaguing Miami to fake his own death. The boat is completely destroyed by the storm, but somehow Dexter makes it out alive. How could this be possible at all? Hurricanes kill people all of the time, even those who are bunkered down, trying to protect themselves from them. Yet somehow Dexter Morgan was able to ride directly into one in an uncovered boat and make it out unscathed. It's utter nonsense. The writers tried to explain this away by claiming Dexter used the boat's life raft to get to safety, but where would that safety even be? Did the wind push his small lifeboat and an uninjured Dexter all the way to Oregon? If not, what shore did he and his raft wash up on? How is an entire boat destroyed by the strength of the storm, but somehow a flimsy rubber raft was not? The fact of the matter is that Dexter should have died in that storm, and originally the showrunners wanted him to die at the end of the series. The ending was rewritten for a few reasons, but it was written so poorly and with such a ridiculous conclusion that most fans were incredibly upset by it. In fact, this ending has been ranked by many critics as one of the worst finales in TV history, and rightfully so. The conclusion to Dexter's original story deserved so much more, but instead, he is implausibly painted as a superhuman who can face the direct brute force of a Category 3 hurricane and live to tell the tale. He was also somehow able to sneak his sister's corpse out of the hospital without anyone noticing or attempting to stop him before riding into the hurricane. Sure, the hospital staff were very busy preparing for the storm's landfall, something most hospitals take care of days in advance of such an event, but Dexter disconnected her life support before taking her, which should have immediately set off alerts for the staff to come help her. Then he effortlessly pushes an adult person right out of the doors of the hospital with no questions asked. It's all just too unbelievable, making it the biggest plot hole of the show. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the crazy things that would happen if Lila didn't kill Dokes, click the video on the screen.